boys? You just got back from training. We're back with another video today. Underdogs, undeniable contenders, and legacy fights. UFC 264, McGregor versus Poirier 3 will not only be the biggest fight of the year, but the biggest fight for both men's careers. As Conor McGregor, legacy champion, the Mystic Mac, money-making cash cow, grandfather, one of the four founders of the UFC of this generation, who has brought the pay-per-views and the company to where it is today. The $4.2 billion worth man is deciding to put his career on the line. Is he humble? Does he have the eye of the tiger, or is he civilized? Against the Diamond, Dustin, the former lineal lightweight champion Poirier, a man who came back from adversity and has found himself in loss in uncomfortable positions in multiple losses against Conor McGregor, against Michael Johnson, and a few others, but has rebounded against fights like Dan Hooker after his title shot loss to Khabib Nurmagomedov, and finally has made his one break-it hit and knocking out Conor McGregor in surprising upset in early January of this year. They have decided to fight in the summer, which is McGregor's territory. The summer smackdowns, it is here, and we have a lot of good fights on this pay-per-view, boy. Let me tell you, I am so excited. We're starting off this pay-per-view card with the big underdog and pro debut of 9-4 Chris Montano, who is coming into this fight against a huge 8-1 underdog against rising star and prospect, super contender, Sugar Sean O'Malley. The original Dana White's Contender Series, one of the biggest names to ever come out of that show. He has made a big, loud noise in the last 4 years by his surprising size and superior style in the bantamweight division. Being almost 5'10", 5'11", he's used his size and attributes and length to completely dismantle his opponents with outstanding athletic ability and fight IQ. He is the Israel Adesanya of the bantamweight division and is coming off a double KO win against Thomas Almeida in one fight. After his surprising loss setback against Marlon Chito Vera, former prospect himself, against a problem with leg kicks, but he has bounced back and showed that he's conditioned and is looking to make quick work against Chris Montano, who is on his way to the title shot. Speaking of former prospects, Dominic Cruz, former bantamweight champion, arguably greatest of all time in that division, has announced if Dominic Sugar Sean O'Malley win this fight, he'll be in talks for an actual ranked fight. That is Dominic Cruz if he wins this fight. Also, we have a big crossroad fights with Tai Tuivasa, who is a heavyweight legend you've probably seen the last couple of pay-per-views with Nelk Boys drinking beer off the shoe, but that's not the only thing he's been drinking, blood out of people's heads and brains. He's been on the last two via knockout winning streak, KOing the likes of Stefan Struve and many others. He's making his fight against Greg Hardy, I believe, who's coming off a loss or a win, and is looking to make it back into the top 5 or top 8 against the big, really heavyweight industry. Whoever wins this fight between these two will be taken seriously. Greg Hardy, a huge underdog, looking to fight the high-caliber Tai Tuivasa. If winning, can redeem himself as an actual fighter and a serious contender. And Tuivasa, if gets a quick knockout win against a big name like Greg Hardy, can be in talks for fighting the actual heavyweight contenders like a Curtis Razor Blades or a Cyril Gane or an Alexander Volkov. Irene Aldana versus Yana Kunitskaya, who will be fighting for the bantamweight contender spot. Both are, I believe, ranked, and whoever wins this fight will be in talks to probably headline or co-headline a fight night, a big fight night, and that's what they usually do. In Dana White's eyes, redemption for legacy. Gilbert Burns, the redemption fight coming off a loss against champion Kamaru Usman, who was actually doing really good, having the champion rocking and rolling with tremendous punch selection, and did very well against a chinny fighter like Kamaru Usman, who completely shut that off by getting dropped multiple times by Gilbert Burns' power and all of his dangerous attributes he displayed against fighting the champion, but also ended up dying by the sword as he lived by it. When Kamaru Usman recovered from the beating and withstanded the onslaught and was able to go toe-to-toe and really break down and pick off the style and the flaws that Gilbert Burns has, that Kamaru Usman knows, having been in former sparring and training partners for the last 5 years, 8 years, give or take. Knowing each other's flaws and problems, Kamaru Usman just happened to execute them more because he had a more diverse and wider skill set. henceforth why he's one of the greatest of all time and a amazing champion. He's going to fight Gilbert Burns, who, now Gilbert Burns, coming off that loss, is looking to get his confidence back in fighting arguably one of the greatest strikers, arguably the best striker in welterweight history, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, the Karate Kid, an insane karate genius who, if wasn't fighting in an octagon, was fighting in an open field, I don't believe wouldn't be touched by any welterweight fighter in this division. I mean, his offensive awareness, not being able to get hit, is second to none. He fought the prime Tyron Woodley and drawed with the best version of Tyron Woodley, beat guys like Jorge Masvidal with ease, dropping them with side kicks, which arguably is more of a setup kick, but he was able to generate so much power that he could drop him. So it's a big fight for both of them. Gilbert Burns looking for redemption for this fight, hoping to fight for the title, or maybe a Leon Edwards. Stephen Thompson looking to do the same as far as legacy. Both fighting for the same goal, but for different reasons and motivation, which will genuinely come down to whose motives are more powerful when they test each other. Because a style like this, when you have Gilbert Burns, who's an aggressive power puncher, a pressure fighter, who dominated guys like Tyrone Woodley and almost Kamaru Usman, dropping him multiple times, has against a big pressure fighter and explosive, well, how will he handle dealing with a fighter like Stephen Thompson, who is a masterclass performer in lateral movement and counter-striking, which is something that Kamaru Usman executed very solidly by picking his shot with split jabs through the middle, chopping at the legs, get him where he wanted him, made him follow him with punches just to counter-strike him right when he was coming in. Make him chase. He would make Kamaru Usman chase him. Kamaru would make Gilbert Burns chase him and weave and make him want to hit him. And just when he stepped it too much, he would catch him with punches, reset, power jabs to set it up. And was able to manage to drop Gilbert Burns with jabs, which don't make that think that Gilbert Burns is a chinny fighter. He was clearly exhausted and ended up dropping with jabs. Just not that he was really chinny. I genuinely think it was the pressure that Kamaru put on him and the power in Kamaru Usman's jabs, being able to do that. An attribute like long, rangy 1-2 punches, is it something that Stephen Thompson can generate as good? I don't think he could give Jorge Masvidal a one-punch KO like he did. I don't think he could knock the guys that Kamaru Usman knocked out the way he did, though I do think Stephen Thompson is a better striker. I don't think he can put in the solid fundamentals and execute them as good as Kamaru Usman can. And that just comes from, I don't know where that comes from, but I think it comes from championship level ability that Kamaru Usman holds being the champion. And I think Stephen Thompson is more kick. His style is offensive aggression, but it's different. It's not as out there as Kamaru, who executes his fights by via punches, straight, dominant, looping punch. Not a lot of looping punches, mostly straights, and a lot of solid wrestling, strong base fighter. And Stephen Thompson, who is a high on his feet fighter, has to look to be extremely off the center line and not get caught by Burns, who has been seen to knock out guys with ease and drop guys like Tyron Woodley, who's had no problem fighting guys with big power punches, which is something that Stephen Thompson has, being an almost a masterclass kickboxer, one of the greatest of all time. So I definitely do think he's experienced enough to know how to hit a person with precision and speed, but power and constant volume in those strikes may not be as high as a Tyron Woodley or a Gilbert Burns himself, a guy who has powerful punches but has beautiful punch selection and has high volume with those aggressive shots, which I think is going to be the key for him to knock out Stephen Thompson. It's got to be by knockout. His jiu-jitsu is incredibly great, but I don't know if getting him to the ground against a guy like Stephen Thompson is going to do so well. I mean, I think his chance of getting to the ground are obviously there, 50-50. It all depends how Stephen Thompson defends the takedown. But if he's going to win this fight, I believe Stephen Thompson is going to keep it on the feet. I think he's going to handle him in the clinch, and I think Stephen Thompson's awareness of the ground I think it's going to be enough to work with Gilbert Burns' jiu-jitsu, although excellent jiu-jitsu. A guy like Vincent Luque, who is a force on the ground, I don't think is as threatening as Gilbert Burns, because Gilbert Burns is more solidly strong, so he's able to bring more wrestling aggression in mixed with the jiu-jitsu. I do believe Vincent Luque the threat of his jiu-jitsu and ground game was no threat to Stephen Thompson. I think he believed he KO'd. Stephen Thompson actually KO'd Vincent Luque or stopped him. The thing is Are we looking at Stephen Thompson as a guy who is a stepping stone for bigger contenders, but is still a big name, but redeeming himself as he still had it after beating Vincent Luque and beating Geoff Neal, who just came off a win against Robbie Lawler? Stephen Thompson, who just beat both of those fighters back to back, has cemented his spot in the top 5, I believe. Now I think he's a top-ranked fighter. And now, instead of fighting someone below him, the UFC is now realizing that this guy's still got it and is putting him against a higher caliber fighter. Not necessarily higher caliber by a higher rank, moving him back up into that contendership and, testing him with a couple of fighters to make sure Wonder Boy still has it. Now recognizing that where his skill's at, they decided to put him against Gilbert Burns, the last title contender besides Jorge Masvidal, who was a guy that Stephen Thompson beat. So this fight's going to be looking for who's going to land the more power punches. If Gilbert Burns can land, can he execute to his full dismay and finish Stephen Thompson? And if he can't, will he be able to stay composed and dominant for the next 3 rounds to get that win? Because if not, it won't be able to find the knockout. And Thompson creates problems with the body kicks and the counter punches and actually fights back against Burns. Burns will have a hard time, reacting and, not staying composed. Once fighting guys like power punchers like Woodley, who wasn't necessarily in his prime, but Burns still beat him with ease, with a complete unanimous decision domination. Although being a power puncher and a threat, Tyron Woodley didn't really have a lot to fall back on besides his brawling haymaker abilities, rather than Stephen Thompson's fundamental crisp combinations, who doesn't have to rely on knockout powers or setups, just simply being there and can strike and have confidence and be able to just operate on a 50-50 starting of the fight. No setups of a takedown, no threats, but just simply able to stay in the pocket with sheer skill and experience. And that's something Stephen Thompson has in the back pocket, which is a big help for this fight. It's a lot of experience. It's a lot of punch awareness, worrying not to be hit in danger. Stephen Thompson has one of the best danger awarenesses I've ever seen. Taking away with the one sheik in that armor, that one asterisk next to his name, being that surprising knockout loss to Anthony Showtime Pettis, who was a legend, a big evolution in striking, not just in lightweight division, but in history. I mean, you had guys like Royce Gracie and Kim Shamrock to 10 years later, Chuck Liddell and Cheeto Ortiz, Rampage Jackson, and then you got Forrest Griffin, Rashad Evans, and then here comes Anthony Showtime Pettis, who was truly the man, along with Anderson Silva, who were those two were really the people that set in stone the evolution of striking for the 2010s, of the 2010s era of UFC. Then came McGregor and Chris Weidman and Vitor Belfort. There were lots of others, but to really understand how much of a threat Showtime Pettis was, his legacy was almost unimaginable to really understand how great he was in his prime. And him moving up to welterweight, not being who he was necessarily before, still had those tactical IQ, high caliber, flashy moves that allowed him to knock out a fighter like Stephen Thompson. Although I don't think Anthony Pettis could beat Gilbert Burns. I think striking-wise and who's a more tactical fighter, I would give it to Anthony Pettis. I don't think he could beat Gilbert Burns, but saying that Stephen Thompson got knocked out by Anthony Pettis is not a reason to think that Gilbert Burns can knock out Stephen Thompson because Anthony Pettis did it. They're two different type of styles where I don't think Burns is creative enough or technically sound enough to get a win in that way that that Anthony Pettis did to Stephen Thompson. I think he's going to have to go on a different approach. And my only question is he going to be more gun-shy? Because the last time he exploded and showed great performance against Kamaru Usman, almost had him hurt and looked like he was going to get him out of there, ended up tiring, the pressure, and the experience and knowledge that Kamaru Usman has of Gilbert Burns, sparring with him and know how his flaws are, where he has trouble, was able to execute those problems. Only he knew. Though, does Stephen Thompson know? Can he find out in the fight as it goes on, realizes how he ticks? Or is he going to be able to, I don't know if he's going to be offensive aggressive and press, Burns to make him overextend, to make him trade just to get out of the way and tire him out? Is he going to try to bait Burns into loading up his shots to counter-strike him? Or is he going to try to wear him down in the waiting game, which sounds like the more soundly thing Stephen Thompson would do? I would see it as more of like a split decision win by Stephen Thompson, or maybe if Stephen Thompson tries to go that approach of trying to get the decision win and try to play the point fighting game and picking his shots when he can and playing tactical around Gilbert Burns' aggressive style, Gilbert Burns could end up just taking Stephen Thompson down, taking advantage of Stephen Thompson's wariness to getting close, and use that as a setup for takedowns to control the fight and just dominate Stephen Thompson the most of the fight and get the unanimous decision win? Or is Gilbert Burns going to try to go for the KO win, follow up on his high volume of punch selection, and try to get him out of there quick? Because although I think Stephen Thompson's a better fighter than Usman, I don't think the recovery and they operate maybe a little different under pressure. I don't think if that was Burns throwing those shots at Thompson that he was throwing at Usman, I'm not sure Thompson would have survived that. Now, I'm not even saying Burns would even be able to land those shots against Thompson, being that he has such a high IQ level for tactical stand-up fighting. His stand-up's so solid, I don't think he would allow himself to be in that position to get caught. But if did, I do not think he would be able to recover. I think Burns' power is a big threat in this fight, and if he can utilize that, I think he could get the knockout. But for him to get there and try to set that up by being aggressive and set the pace, it would require him to be in a trade with Stephen Thompson that would allow Stephen Thompson to take advantage of Gilbert Burns being so overly aggressive, which he does have a tendency to have. So it's really a 50-50 fight in this fight, but if I had to be the most honest how Gilbert Burns would win, I would say it would be by unanimous decision. If I were to look at Stephen Thompson's best way to win, it would be by unanimous decision. Now, Gilbert Burns being able to KO Stephen Thompson, getting close, being aggressive, and utilizing his chances to get Thompson in trades and taking those chances with eyes, with no hesitation, and getting him out of there quick, like he did with Usman, is a humongous possibility. Being that Thompson is getting older, he's all the fights he has, as good as he is, problems with taking shots may be a little different, and I think he could utilize Thompson's fear of that knockout to really just coast the unanimous decision win and take those opportunities of fear of the punches to get the takedown and batter him on the ground, slowing Thompson down so we can get those last 2 rounds in and coast the win. But I can also see Thompson staying highly composed, being that he has fought on the big lights, fighting in Madison Square Garden against Tyron Woodley, and fighting against the biggest names in the division has to offer, and handle it in stride. Even losing, getting knocked out by Stephen Thompson, losing by Anthony Pettis, Wonder Boy took it on the chin like a man and was just happy to get back in there, getting back-to-back wins against Geoff Neal and Vincent Luque. Really hard to judge this fight, but if you were to put your money on it, you could either go by a unanimous decision win by Stephen Thompson or probably a KO win by Burns. Honestly, a KO win by Burns isn't the most farthest, craziest thing for him to win, and I only say that because although I believe him taking down Stephen Thompson, battering his body, slowing him down so he's not as offensively incredible on the feet, not as active, I think Thompson and Burns both have flaws in their cardio in different ways. I think Burns is a more aggressive, a more athletic fighter than Thompson. Now, as far as moves, what they can do, I would give to Thompson. I think he's a more fundamental fighter. I think he's a more talented fighter, given his style, his experience, and his creativity. And I think Thompson does a really good job of picking his shots and combinations even when he's exhausted. When he doesn't have the gas tank, when one of his attributes is taken away, like speed or maybe his legs when wobbled, Thompson has so much time and so much experience that he thrives in those situations and he replaces athletic and mobility with fundamentals and memory. So he has enough experience to know what his fighter is going to do to him when he's hurt. Like, if he gets hit to the body and he's hurt, he's going to go to my head. He's going to keep hitting the body, or he's going to try to get me think he's going to the body, just hit me in the head. So I'm going to fake low and parry out with the head. It's things like that where you move that he's so solid at that I think is going to be a big problem for Burns to come in and swing in. Or is Burns' young, talent just going to run through him? Because when you look at Woodley fighting Stephen Thompson, who draw the first time, and Woodley won the second time against Burns Woodley, who was not necessarily the same guy he was in his prime, but Burns still beat him in a handily dominated the decision win. It really makes you think how this fight's going to go. You can look how they fight their opponents, how they fought the same guy, or how they've lost, and how can each opponent execute each other's flaws, or how would they usually fight this fight. And the real question you got to ask yourself is, who do you see really, though, out of the four, who do you see really executing the game plan the best? And if you were to say about execution, it's hard not to say Burns because he's so young and talented, but Thompson sticking to the fundamentals and trying to chop down that tree and really get at Burns' conditioning and poking at the flaws that he showed in the Usman fight is a huge possibility. So a win for both of them wouldn't be too big of a surprise, but it's undeniable the win of this fight wouldn't be in the top 3 contendership because the welterweight division is so stacked with Kamaru Usman waiting for a fight against Leon Edwards, or maybe in talks for Jorge Masvidal to fight against Colby Covington. That could be the next fight. Honestly, I could see Dana White having Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal be the ultimate fighter, and having Leon Edwards fight Kamaru Usman, or you could have the winner of Gilbert Burns' Wonderboy fight Kamaru Usman for the title, but that's more of a video I want to do till after the fights. I want to watch the pay-per-view, then the next day talk about who's going to fight who, but that's just something that's kind of on my mind because the division's so stacked and there's so many contenders for the division to fight the champion that have a right to fight the champion. Besides maybe Leon Edwards, I could see Leon Edwards taking another fight and fighting the loser of Gilbert Burns' Wonderboy. I could see that. Honestly, I think that would be a pretty good move. The loser of this fight fights Leon Edwards. Fighting Nate Diaz, dominating him in a good fashion, but just did enough to win. And even getting hurt in that last 5th round by Nate Diaz was kind of a shook of the head. Pick like someone like Gilbert Burns or Kamaru Usman, I would see handling Nate a lot differently. I'll probably talk about Nate's career in a whole nother video as himself. That whole fight, just Nate in his last few fights and how he's been over the years has really been interesting to me because I've always loved Nate, But for the redemption of Gilbert Burns versus the battle for legacy for Wonderboy Thompson is a big co-main event, one of the best co-main events I've seen in a while. I haven't seen a co-main event I've been this hyped for since Michael Chandler and Dan Hooker, and honestly, that doesn't even top this fight because these guys are so close, and you could see them both winning in their own way, and you could see them winning clearly in their own way because they both shown that they can execute their strengths so well and do so well under pressure. And as Thompson's got older, it's been harder to do that because he's just not as he was before. But the question is, how really good is he? Because he's defeated guys that were younger than him and were supposed to be set to be a stepping stone to beat Thompson, but Thompson beat Geoff Neal and Vincent Luque in a pretty rather dominant fashion. What makes you think, can Gilbert Burns' young, hungry, athletic superiority in youth and speed get the better of Thompson, or is Thompson's fundamentals going to be to outbeat him? And that really just comes down to the fight night this weekend. Last but not least, the elephant in the room, Conor McGregor versus Dustin the Diamond Poirier 3 is also this week. I did make a video today, but I really wanted to reestablish my thoughts on it because I felt like I was rushed because I had to go to the gym and go shopping for my mom, and a lot of thoughts on my mind this last week that I wasn't really able to fully enjoy the conversation and really get to talk about this fight, which is so important for the division and history of both men's career, and the pressure on this fight is so big. And it's good to see Conor coming back from a loss, more of a wake-up call for him to get back in it. Get back. I think every time Conor loses, he's always more hungry. Besides maybe the Mayweather fight, which honestly is not a lot to take away from that fight, henceforth going to another sport and fighting the best of the best, more of a circus match and more of just a exposition and more of an extravaganza to watch for entertainment purposes rather than actual legacy. Conor, who was set to fight Manny Pacquiao if he beat Poirier the rematch, who wasn't even caring about the title, but more for the legacy of his career and what he wanted to do with his life, what interested him, was more set to fight Dustin Poirier, not as a contender for the belt and for he saw himself, but more as a warm-up for a southpaw fighter like Manny Pacquiao and to practice against a southpaw like Poirier, so he can practice with southpaws, because McGregor struggled a lot with southpaws because how his stance is, which you could see in the rematch with Dustin Poirier and with the two fights with Nate Diaz, who was also a southpaw. Conor, I believed, lost his contract deal with Manny Pacquiao for that $80 million, $100 million super fight out the window. Now a reality check. I hope McGregor's been training a lot more, head on straight, and has seemed to be training harder than ever before. And it's probably the closest thing we've seen since the McGregor that fought Eddie Alvarez or Nate Diaz in the rematch. A motivated McGregor. A McGregor has something to prove and to win. And looking to do so this weekend against Dustin the Diamond Poirier, who is so tactical and so much more of a virtuoso in defense, who is almost a magic man in being able to get hit and then get out of range and then set up lateral movements for his opponents after hitting him, to want to chase in and get another punch in just for him to counter slip and make them pay with the counter punch, which is Dustin Poirier's bread and butter shots, where he picks to perfection. And even if he has to land one or he has to take one and put himself in bad spots just to get those shots later on in the fight, is something that he takes with stride, because it is one thing that Dustin Poirier does not have, is he doesn't get emotional in fights anymore, which was a big plus for Conor in the first fight. Once he knocked out Dustin Poirier, getting in his head, he's grown a lot and matured a lot as an athlete, to where he doesn't really let that side of him get into his head, the middle part of the game, and really just stay focused and disciplined and try to get his opponents out of there, rather than trying to rush it or taking his shots when they're there. Being more patient and being more of a tactical chess-like style, rather than aggressive, a young, unexperienced Poirier. He's grown a lot, and it showed in not following in with Conor McGregor's strengths, not letting him bait him with the left hand, taking his head off the center line, baiting McGregor in just to counterpunch right when Conor gave one. He would take one to give one, and was actually managed to survive Conor's left-hand shot, which is Conor McGregor's biggest power punch, and was shown to be able to take McGregor's left-hand shot. Just not only dish it out, but receive his power, knowing that he could take it and retrieve it back, which was something that was really scary as a Conor fan, to anyone that looks at Conor as, Mystic Mac, the one-punch guy. Once a Poirier who was seasoned enough to handle the pressure and handle the left-hand shot, it's hard not to say he can't do the same thing again. Plus, having a win and beating him not even 4 or 5 months ago, giving him the confidence that he already beat him and knows how to beat him, chopping up the leg kicks, being more patient in the in-box style, and making himself a moving target, having Conor have to chase in more and make him open for shots, having to be more aggressive and try to get the knockout against Poirier and make him more open for shots. As McGregor's approach being always, McGregor's approach and McGregor's side is always, whenever he loses, whether it's submission, leg kicks, exhaustion, McGregor always gets the factor that rule to his defeat. He uses it as his advantage. Whether if it's leg kicks that took out Conor's leg and maybe not pulling his punches back in time, getting caught on the chin by Poirier, his offensive awareness and defense is going to be much more higher for this trilogy fight. He's going to adapt more, and he's not going to allow himself be he's going to be more mobile and not allow himself to be more hittable as a target for Dustin Poirier. And I hope to be lighter on his feet. For what we've seen at Conor at his best, I do believe that Conor McGregor at his best, the McGregor that fought Eddie Alvarez and dusted Chad Mendes, probably has the best shot at beating Khabib or any lightweight in history, or even welterweight. I mean, it's just facts. When you look at Conor McGregor at his best and Dustin Poirier at his best, you would put all your money on Conor. The best Conor McGregor beats Poirier at his best any day, prime for prime. And Conor isn't his prime. I'm pretty sure physically Conor McGregor has never been this fit or felt this good ever, but his mental state is a completely different thing, as far as waking up in silk sheets and having $1 billion whiskey brand to fall back on in case he loses, rather than not falling back on anything in legacy. This is kind of a different Conor as far as motto and mentality-wise goes, but physically, I think this is McGregor's best as it gets. I don't think the physical side of McGregor has really changed. I think he's always been a physical freak. Even with the Khabib fight, I strongly felt like Conor just looked amazing as far as power and punch selection and how he is overall as a fighter. I don't think anything was wrong. I think it was just Khabib's overall strength as a dominant wrestler, which honestly, when you look at Conor and Khabib, or Khabib in general, being the greatest lightweight of all time, I do not disagree. But as an overall fighter, I don't think he's the best fighter of all time. I think if you look at someone like Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, Charles Oliveira, somebody that has striking, grappling, chin, everything, all attributes that makes an MMA fighter a complete arsenal, I believe those fighters have Khabib down to none. Khabib, who kind of somewhat struggles in striking and clinch, but has such an incredible ace card in wrestling that he just trumps everything, which makes him the greatest. Which really makes you think, looking back at McGregor Poirier, who I believe McGregor Poirier are both overall fighters, who are both great. It's hard not to say Conor, how he utilizes those moves. Being light on his feet. For what we've seen the last two fights, he hasn't really been light on his feet. Even with a Cowboy win, where he knocked out Cowboy in aggressive fashion, taking his head clean off, it's hard not to say he wasn't the karate stance, high on his feet McGregor, which is something that he's going to need. He's going to be more kick-oriented, lighter on the feet, more mobile, harder to hit, quicker in and out for Poirier, which is something that would be a big attribute for Conor that I believe would make him more loose, which the looser McGregor is, the better his shots are, the better his shoulder rolls off those punches and gets a cleaner, more damaging shot. Because just like how the more the rounds go on, if you make it out the first round by McGregor, your chance of winning just went up 30%. If you make it out the second round McGregor, your chance of winning just went up 65%, 70%, because he gets more tired out the rounds go by, because his style, that left hand, that kiss of death, has attacks and its stamina and endurance. You can also say that Conor catching you with a punch, his chance of knocking you out are going to go up by 50%. Because if he can catch you once, he can catch you again. And when he catches you again, his chance of knocking you up just tripled. And at that point, it's done. Conor's a fighter with the flaws that he has, and regardless of how he's performed his last couple of fights, regardless of his losses, and only winning one fight in the last 4 years, you can't deny McGregor's style is such a threat. Being, if he hits you, it only takes 2 or 3 with McGregor. He's not a fighter that relies on high combinations. McGregor's the type of fighter that if it's in the 4th or 5th round, or if he's behind on points, a knockout punch is always going to be there. Because McGregor, his footwork is so solid, and his speed is so up with his footwork that he could put himself in a position to land a bomb shot that you wouldn't even be prepared to protect yourself, because he's so quickly at getting his hand to your opponent's chin. He's just so dynamic and artistic on how he set up those knockouts and how he moves his body, and was really complimented when he was loose on his feet, when McGregor was loose, when he had the karate stance, when he fought Eddie Alvarez, when he fought Jose Aldo, light on the feet, rather than being heavy on his feet with Cowboy Cerrone. I'll get in a little bit. That was my mom. And being light on his feet and being heavier to hit, didn't really credit his power. Even with Cowboy, when he set on his shots, when he was heavy-footed and just dominated Cowboy start to finish and knocked him out in 45 seconds, it's hard not to say that, it's hard not to say that, a shot Cerrone, a guy that wasn't really in anymore, hold on. Yeah, that was my mom, guys. I kind of want to watch y'all to say hi, but that'll be another video. Basically, much easier to hit. At this point, it really comes down to who's going to utilize style more for Poirier and McGregor. And at the end of the day, if McGregor can be light on his feet and quick those mistakes, a knockout win or a win by McGregor is not out of a far shot. It's actually very easy. It's actually a very, honestly, a fixed, motivated McGregor, a light on the feet McGregor, a adapted McGregor is probably the best shot at winning this fight in both fighters. But Poirier being so adapted, who's not as soft by the money as McGregor is, who doesn't lost it out of the Tiger, who's always been hungry, in fact, has gotten better since the years went on, is probably the best Poirier we've seen ever. This is probably McGregor's prime being 3 years ago. This is Poirier's prime now. Poirier's in it now. So it's not rather he's not in it. He's always been in it, but as far as Conor not utilizing what he's had, Poirier's utilized what he's had and now adapt to make it even better. Not just an offensive, but in defensive genius. He's the only fighter that I can think, besides maybe Floyd Mayweather, that's allowed Conor McGregor to not just hit him, but let him get the first shot. He set up on McGregor when we look at the first fight and he was like, show me your fucking move, dude. Show me your left hand, dude. You know, Conor hits him with the left hand, the lead right uppercut, one of Conor's best shots. And as Conor does, once he lands, he gets even closer. He chases, he gets the knockout, pressure. That's how Conor is. Poirier knows when it's coming, because knowing when Conor usually hits opponents, they're dumbfounded. There's not really a lot of times where Conor can hit you and then he could come at you 4 different other ways and knock you out, and you're defenseless against all of them. Landing those shots, getting Poirier so much quicker, really exposing Poirier's reflexes and mobility, goes for the same punch, and Poirier, who expected that, baits him in, rolls under, checks him with the right hook to the chin, and points at him. I got you. He tricked Conor. He tricked him. He baited him in. He chopped the leg kicks, and then he chopped the leg kicks. He started whipping the leg kicks. Conor was really heavy-footed in that fight. Took advantage of that as well. He took advantage of a McGregor who didn't take advantage of his own. That's what happens when you're fighting a high-caliber fighter like Poirier and a guy like McGregor who doesn't utilize his light feet, doesn't utilize his kicks, is more patient, is not just stiff and trying to get the knockout and just looking at the fight as an exhibition and not a real fight against someone like Poirier, who's not emotionally invested in the fight at all, but is completely in the fight, respecting the power, respecting everything about McGregor. I mean, it was very easy to see how Poirier got that win by being composed, by breaking McGregor down and taking his soul. I think I talked about how Poirier was going to win in the rematch breakdown, but before the rematch even happened, I believe I made a video, and I may have taken it down, where I'll try to re-upload, but if not, I basically talked about how Poirier handles pressure, and being the same stance as McGregor, both being left-handed fighters, is something that could give Conor problems and could really put a hole and take a step back in Conor's combination shot, stopping him in his tracks and making a finishing knockout shot really hard for McGregor, especially with kicks. The front kick is really hard to land when someone's up in the same stance because you can parry it so much easily. McGregor's side kicks will still be there, but a lot of kicks, even whether they could or couldn't land, it wouldn't really matter because McGregor doesn't use those kicks anyway. So that was that whole plan was mostly out the window. Henceforth, why I believe I said Poirier was going to win by consistently keeping up with McGregor's pressure and baiting Conor in, or even when Conor does land shots where he could finish quickly, Poirier being able to withstand the damage and be immediately able to think on your feet even when hurt is something that Poirier thrives in, which is mostly McGregor's game plan, is to hurt you and then hurt you again and hurt you again. But if you're just solid, you're in the moment, you're not tense, you're moving with it, is something only Poirier can do so well, because in MMA, striking and boxing is not necessarily boxing, it's MMA. I mean, when you look at fighters, Roy Jones said it best when McGregor was going into the Mayweather fight. He expanded on saying MMA fighters, the reason why McGregor's dominated so well is he fought MMA fighters that can box but aren't primarily boxers. So guys that fight McGregor, who, there's boxers that would handle McGregor's skill in a boxing ring, but on the street would get murdered, in an octagon would get murdered. You look at guys that like Eddie Alvarez or Dennis Silva or Jose Aldo, who are extremely good strikers, but aren't necessarily as talented in one necessarily attribute of their entire arsenal, like boxing, like stand-up karate, Kenpo boxing style, which is something that McGregor has mastered to a T and is an almost execution master in knocking people out. It's hard not to say a guy like Poirier, who's literally the only other fighter in the lightweight division, besides maybe Michael Chandler, that I can think dominates in that style as well, who has a threat like that. Mostly Poirier. Chandler I'm going to talk about later. I can talk about Chandler in another video, my thoughts on previous fights. I might talk about Chandler and how the lightweight division ranks up. So I'll talk about them in another video. But as far as Poirier goes, who was a boxer actually in his early career and has a strong mobile background as far as upper body and, Kenpo and karate style, is a really problem for McGregor, somewhat his kryptonite. You can also see McGregor's being his kryptonite against Poirier. So this fight is really a 50-50, honestly. And even with Poirier winning his fight against McGregor, it's hard to say that Conor won't win this fight, being that it is Conor McGregor. It's a big name. He's the cash cow. And to show you how good McGregor's legacy was, even only winning one fight in the last 4 years, it's crazy to see. It's not that surprising to see people still thinking McGregor's going to win by an easy knockout because of what he's shown in his skill. and it almost felt too good to be true losing that rematch, which is something that I felt, and I believe some other people felt going into that fight, thinking that it was so fixated on McGregor and no promotion against Poirier to think that Poirier win was out of the blue. So when he did win, and it wasn't that he gassed out Conor and Conor lost his arsenal, he lost his attributes, he didn't have the speed, he was exhausted, he got taken down, he wasn't able to utilize his skills and just get dominated like with the Nate Diaz fight or Mayweather fight. He completely took Conor out early with his full arsenal, but just outmaneuvered him, outworked him, and outthinked him, and ended up just beating McGregor. And that can come from a lot of things, mostly coming from, I like to believe, is unmotivation or an underestimation of the leg kicks, or not fully making an MMA fight, focusing mostly on boxing. Not a lot of kicks were thrown in that fight, not a lot of movement was utilized like Poirier was utilizing it, making it more of a fight than a boxing match, taking Conor off guard with a takedown, something that Khabib could even do that well. He had to work to get Conor down. Obviously dominated that fight. I'm not going to say Khabib dominated him, but the way Poirier took him down so quickly, so fast, it was like the takedown wasn't even McGregor's mind. Like it was just a boxing match, you know. It was like a different fight. He wasn't really taking in and respecting what could come in an MMA fight. And I believe Conor's learned from that mistake, and I hope it will be enough for him to win. So my predictions for this weekend, I'm gonna go by a Conor via knockout stoppage. Conor said that he wants to knock him out in the 4th round via front head kick. Mystic Max predictions, which makes you wonder later round, which is something that McGregor's not really good at, or not necessarily needs to do in the later rounds. Not something he really is comfortable with. And those the later rounds where he's in deep waters, which makes you think how much endurance Conor's gotten since then. And he also have his trainer saying he's gonna knock him out in the first 60 seconds, which is like a way different outlook than what McGregor had the rematch. The rematch, Conor was a lot more humble. He came in on a yacht, civilized. I think he believed he had an opening statement on the press conference stating that he was gonna donate 500K to Poirier's charity, the Good Fight Foundation, along with hoping that the fight went the distance. Meaning, I hope the fight goes the distance. I'm hoping for a long bout as far as actually fighting and dominating and having confidence in his own skill set. Just saying, no respect, I hope it's a good fight. Which is something that a guy like McGregor, you wouldn't think would have that type of mindset, especially Conor McGregor, which really brought kind of a foreshadowing to what was to come on that night when he got knocked out. So, hoping to see Conor stating that he's no more Mr. Nice Guy, he's back to old Mystic Mac. If those are true, and me being a Conor fan, I would like to say Conor win by via knockout stoppage. Poirier win is not out of the ordinary. In fact, I would say it's Conor by an edge. I would say 52% Conor, 48 Poirier. Like it's that close. But just because it's Conor McGregor and we've seen him at his best and we know what he can do at his best when he's motivated, it's hard not to say him getting knocked out, him getting a reality check, and wanting a rematch as quick as possible really makes you think that maybe he really wants it. Maybe he's hungry for this, which I hope. So McGregor win. Gilbert Burns versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. As a fan, I like Burns' style. Burns has an amazing style that I love. I like how Burns is in the octagon. I like how he uses power. I just like how he carries himself in the octagon. I'm a very fan favorite of Burns. Even when he lost to Usman, I don't think there's been any fighter besides maybe Colby Covington that's had that much damage, but also has been that close to finishing him. I mean, Colby Covington almost finished Kamaru Usman in a completely different way as far as tactical approach, piecing him up in the later rounds and really stiffing him up. I mean, Gilbert Burns came out from the open bell, just smashing into his face, dropping him a couple times, gassing out, then losing. It's hard not to say he can't do the same thing, but actually execute the knockout against Wonderboy, who I think is a better striker than Usman, but I don't think under pressure and not being a sparring partner to Gilbert Burns that Usman was, who Kamaru Usman actually trained with Gilbert Burns for multiple years, knowing his flaws because he trained with him and knowing his attributes, probably had a big advantage going into that fight and exposing Gilbert Burns' problems because they sparred a lot of times, and Gilbert Burns, what I heard, did get the best of Usman in sparring. A real fight's a lot different. Pressure is undue. Fans and crowd is undue. I mean, anxiety under the bright lights. There's so many things that have taken into effect besides the actual fight. That's a lot different in a stadium at the arena than an actual sparring session that comes in with the middle side, which is something that I think was a big plus for Usman, was his composure, being an Olympic wrestler and being a Division II wrestler. that gave him the edge, which is something that I believe Stephen Thompson, as far as pressure and mentality, can execute as well. I believe Wonder Boy's kickboxing record's like plus 40 and over, I believe, something like that. He's arguably the greatest. He's the greatest karate / taekwondo fighter of all time in MMA, I believe. His stand-up's insane, and his fundamentals, I think it's going to be a good fight. I don't think it will go to a stoppage. I don't know why. If it does, I believe they both can get each other by stoppage, but I also think they both can get each other by decision. But I do think it's about who executes it better. And I'm going to go with Wonder Boy Thompson. I think Wonder Boy Thompson's experience is going to prevail. I wouldn't be surprised if Gilbert Burns' hungriness and wanting to get back to the title knocks out Burns or knocks out Wonder Boy Thompson or gets a win over Thompson decision. Leaves it to the judges. Wouldn't be a surprise either. And I would really look forward to seeing Burns win this fight and get in the top 4 discussion of a Leon Edwards or, a Vincent Luque, who just came off a win against Tyron Woodley and retired him. And Sugar Sean O'Malley, I see by KO first round. I think it'd be an early stoppage. I think Sugar Sean O'Malley's a tremendous prospect fighter and is probably the greatest prospect that we've ever seen in MMA, besides maybe Anderson Silva or Conor McGregor. Yet he does have a loss on his record, which makes you think problems in this fight could be a possibility as far as leg kicks and certain things. But I don't think that this guy, who's never had a fight in the UFC, his 9-4 record pro debut in the UFC, big underdog in Chris Montinto, is going to really be able to execute the flaws that Sugar Sean has. And I don't think a lot of people are going to be able to do it. I think they should give Sugar Sean a ranked fight, but not push him out so quickly, because the last time they did that was against Cheeto Bear and he got mauled. I think they're setting up his career very well with a lot of opponents that are probably going to be punctuated with a ranked fighter. I believe after this fight, I believe if he beats this guy, I think they might punctuate his career of this year, maybe with one more fight at the end of the year, punctuate with next year, maybe give him a ranked opponent like Dominic Cruz. Or maybe Dominic Cruz next, honestly. That's not far out of reach, but I don't believe the UFC nor Sugar Sean wants to be thrown straight into the limelight with that high competition in the bantamweight division, which is arguably the most stacked and competitive division in the UFC besides maybe welterweight and lightweight. Welterweight, lightweight, and bantamweight are probably the top, along with middleweight. But if we're going by stacked, I mean, I can name everyone in the middleweight division along with lightweight and welterweight, but I mean, it's hard not to say Sugar Sean's career to a title shot of the top 5 contenders is going to be a long run. It's hard not to say it won't be a long run because he's got a lot to go. But I think he'll make quick work of Chris Montinto. The crossword fights between Tai Tuivasa and Greg Hardy, I believe Tai Tuivasa will get the better of Greg Hardy. I think he'll knock him out. I think he'll do it in a pretty good fashion. I'll be surprised if Greg Hardy come here and show a lot of athleticism. I believe he's an extremely talented person, not just athlete, but to come to MMA where it's more of combat and survival rather than a sport, where NFL, you're on the line, you're running plays and drills every 12 seconds and getting back on the line, where you're doing 15 minutes of exhaustion and fighting another man who's trying to hit you in the face. Greg Hardy's shown extreme talent with just such a short time to perfect those skills and come to the sport, which I respect. So I wouldn't be surprised if it goes to decision, but I don't see a win for Greg Hardy being that big of a chance against a guy like Tai Tuivasa, who's just a monster in the cage, a knockout threat. I think he's going to take his head off, just be Iran Aldana versus Yana Kunitskaya, I believe her name is. I'm not too experienced on the women's division. I'm not, or as much as I am the men's, that's just how it is. Or even men's certain divisions, I know more than more. Like, I know as much about the women's division as I do the men's flyweight division, which is something I'm going to get better at, more understanding of the entire roster of the UFC so I can keep up to date on up-and-comers and really give you a great depiction on who would win for my channel. And I'm going to go with Iran Aldana because I believe I've seen her fight before. I have seen Yana Kunitskaya fight before, but her knockout wins have been by early prelim level fighters and early pro debuts. And Iran Aldana I've actually seen fight multiple times, wins and losses against ranked fighters. So I think her experience is going to get the better of Yana Kunitskaya in a decision win, maybe knockout or submission probably. A submission would be sexy because she's hot. Regardless, guys, UFC 264. Make sure y'all buy that shit. I'm coming at you live. It's been a big appreciation. Thank you for watching this video. Like, subscribe, share to all your friends. I'm gonna watch Yellowstone with my mom and my brother. Love you guys. Peace.